Throughout the day, I've noticed many leftist personalities and journalists saying, don't let what's happening in Europe be used to defend Donald Trump. What's happening in Europe? Well, I've known about the widespread. Throughout the day, I've noticed many leftist personalities and journalists saying, don't let what's happening in Throughout the day, I've noticed many leftist personalities and journalists saying, don't let what's happening in Europe be used to defend Donald Trump. What's happening in Europe? Well, I've known about the widespread riots over the coronavirus lockdown. The other day in Paris, we saw a massive traffic gridlock as people are desperately fleeing the city, as France wants to institute new draconian measures like you can't go outside unless you're carrying your papers, justifying why you're allowed to. Well, in many different places, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Czech Republic, Prague, there is a very serious crisis looming. In fact, the U.S. National Guard is, I can't believe this. U.S. National Guard is being deployed to the Czech Republic over COVID-19. It's looking pretty serious. But what was it about what's going on in Europe that would be used to defend Donald Trump? It's this. Merkel warns of long, hard winter as lockdowns return. You see, the lockdowns are returning because of a massive COVID spike. If there is a massive COVID spike and Europe did everything right and Donald Trump did everything wrong, why is this happening in Europe? You see the problem? As it turns out, perhaps, we don't know what we could or should have done. And while we can look at Europe and say, see, Europe did the right thing, everything's going, oh, it's back. Uh-oh. The only answer that they have is lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And of course, that's not a good idea. It's resulting in massive unrest. And I got to say, the craziest thing to me is that U.S. National Guard are apparently going to be helping in the Czech Republic. I didn't even realize we were sending. I mean, that's huge. The destabilization is getting serious. The violent unrest is beyond serious. People are saying no to these lockdowns across the U.S. and the continent of Europe. I think that if Joe Biden wins, you will see the same thing here. So let me just tell you, we are asked over and over again, which president will be the one to end the violence? Perhaps if Joe Biden wins, we won't see any more leftist violence because they believe Joe Biden will do what they want. In fact, I believe we will still see quite a bit, just not maybe as severe. They'll want to put on the pressure. But I think instead, we will get lockdown crisis and violence and riots like they are in Europe, because that's what the left and Democrats have been saying. Look what Europe did. Europe did it right. Trump did it wrong. And now it doesn't matter, does it? It seems that regardless of what was done, it's getting bad. Here's the story. Another weekend of violent anti-lockdown protests in Europe. Clashes in Italy and Spain as Belgium becomes the latest to lock down and restrictions tighten across the continent. Anti-lockdown protests spread to Italy on Friday as protesters clashed with police after hundreds attended an unauthorized demonstration in Florence, while hundreds more gathered in Bologna. At the same time, Bologna, I don't know, Bologna, or however you pronounce it. At the same time, a similar event in Barcelona also descended into violence, with demonstrators throwing bricks at police and setting bins alight. The protests came as Spain, Italy, and several other European countries introduced new measures to curb the spread of coronavirus amid a rising second wave of infections. Belgium on Thursday night introduced a 6-week closure of non-essential businesses and extended November school holidays by an extra week, as Prime Minister Alexander De Croo warned the country otherwise faced a breakdown of its healthcare system. On Friday, crowds in Florence's historic center chanted anti-government slogans and threw fireworks as they came up against police cordons. The demonstration came after Italy announced its third emergency measure in 2 weeks on Sunday. Right now, we're very worried about mass unrest around the election. The left is convinced Donald Trump is an evil fascist and that the police are lurking around every corner, hunting down black and brown people. That's not true. In Europe, people are rioting over draconian lockdowns. And this is where we start to see the issue isn't so much whether you support or oppose political violence, though I, for the most part, do. The issue is about whether there is actually something wrong that must be opposed. I had a conversation recently with a leftist who said there are justifications for political violence, notably if the Jews rose up in Europe and fought back. Yes, that's an excellent point. I don't know what to say about Europe because I'm not there, nor do I live there. There are many people who believe that the rioters in Europe should not riot because the government is just trying to save lives. There are many others that believe the government doesn't have a right to shut down in this way and deprive people of their God-given rights. Well, Europe is very different from the US. And I guess what I'm trying to say is at some point, obviously, there is a threshold where people must fight back. I don't know if that's actually what you need to do in Europe right now. Like in the US, I mentioned, people seem to think that there's cops lurking around every corner and hunting down people, which is just not true. In Europe, people need only go about their lives. They don't need to engage in violence. If people just said no to the government would not function properly. It's really interesting because the power of the government, no matter what they actually believe, is derived from the will of the masses. The government can say, no, we're in charge, we do X, we have guns. It doesn't matter. If people just go about their business calmly and peacefully, then there is nothing the government can do other than bully people, target them. Maybe it devolves into violence when state forces try to repress the people, typically. But if most people just said no, then there would be no government. It's all about the confidence of the people.